In the autumn of 1917, men drowned standing upright. The mud of Passchendaele swallowed them whole, and the earth never gave them back. The stretcher tilts. A bearer stumbles, his boots slipping from the wooden planks into the darkness below. He sinks to his thigh in an instant. The wounded man groans as the others struggle to hold the stretcher level. Rain falls in sheets across the wasteland of craters, each one filled with black water that gleams under distant artillery flashes. The trapped bearer claws at the duckboards, but the mud pulls him deeper. To his waist, to his chest. His comrades cannot release their burden. They can only watch. The mud reaches his shoulders, then his chin, then silence. The stretcher party moves on. There is nothing else to be done. The Ypres Salient had been killing men for 3 years, but in the autumn of 1917, it would claim them in ways no soldier had ever imagined. By the summer of that year, the British Empire stood at a crossroads between survival and catastrophe. German submarines were strangling the Atlantic lifeline that fed the British Isles. In April alone, U-boats had sent 860,000 tons of Allied shipping to the bottom of the ocean. Grain ships, ammunition transports, fuel tankers. They slipped beneath the waves faster than shipyards could replace them. Admiral John Jellicoe, First Sea Lord, delivered a grim assessment to the War Cabinet. Britain had 6 weeks of food reserves remaining. If the hemorrhaging continued, the war would be lost before Christmas. The Admiralty believed it had identified the source of the bleeding. German submarine pens along the Belgian coast, at Ostend and Zeebrugge, were launching the U-boats that prowled the shipping lanes. Capture those ports, the admirals argued, and the submarine menace could be broken. The army would need to advance through Flanders, push the Germans from the Belgian coast, and give the Royal Navy room to breathe. It was a strategic imperative that could not be ignored. But the army had problems of its own. In April and May, the French commander Robert Nivelle had launched a massive offensive along the Chemin des Dames, promising a breakthrough that would end the war in 48 hours. The attack had been a bloodbath. 187,000 French soldiers fell in weeks of futile assault against prepared German defenses. The failure broke something in the French army. By June, 54 divisions had mutinied. Soldiers refused to attack. They would hold their trenches, they said, but they would no longer walk into machine gun fire for generals who did not understand the war. General Philippe Pétain, the new French commander, confided privately to his British counterpart. The French army was exhausted. It could not mount offensive operations for the remainder of the year, perhaps longer. Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig absorbed this information with a mixture of alarm and opportunity. If the French could not attack, then the burden fell to Britain. And if Britain must attack, then Haig knew exactly where. He had been planning an offensive in Flanders since 1916. The collapse of France simply removed the obstacles to launching it. Haig was 56 years old, a Scottish cavalry officer with a bristling mustache and an unshakable faith in his own judgment. He believed God had chosen him for this moment. He believed that the German army was weakening, that one more great blow might shatter its resistance entirely. And he believed that cavalry, his beloved cavalry, might yet exploit a breakthrough and restore mobility to a war that had become a siege. His critics, including Prime Minister David Lloyd George, considered him dangerously out of touch. But Haig commanded the largest army Britain had ever fielded, and in the summer of 1917, he intended to use it. The ground he had chosen for his offensive was among the most treacherous on the Western Front. The Ypres Salient was a bulge in the Allied lines surrounding the ancient Belgian cloth town of Ypres. British and Commonwealth forces had held this ground since 1914, but holding it came at a terrible cost. The salient was a shallow bowl, with British positions occupying the low ground while German forces looked down from a series of ridges that curved around them like the rim of an amphitheater. From Pilkem Ridge in the north to Passchendaele Ridge in the east, German observers could watch every British movement. Artillery spotters tracked supply convoys, reinforcement columns, and ammunition dumps. The salient was a killing ground, where concealment was nearly impossible. The terrain itself was a relic of the sea. Flanders had been reclaimed marshland for centuries, its sodden fields drained by an intricate network of streams, canals, and ditches. The water table lurked just 3 or 4 feet below the surface. In dry weather, the clay soil held firm enough. But 3 years of shell fire had obliterated the drainage system. Craters overlapped craters. Ditches had been blown apart and filled with debris. The land had lost its ability to shed water. When the rains came, the salient transformed into something between a swamp and a lake. A porridge of mud and water that could swallow men, horses, and machines without a trace. Haig entrusted the main assault to General Sir Hubert Gough, commander of the Fifth Army. At 47, Gough was the youngest army commander in the British Expeditionary Force, known for his aggressive spirit and cavalry dash. Haig valued these qualities. He wanted a commander who would push forward relentlessly, who would maintain momentum and exploit opportunities. What Gough lacked in methodical planning, Haig believed, he made up for in audacity. The Second Army, on Gough's right flank, was commanded by a very different sort of general. Sir Herbert Plumer was 60 years old, a veteran of colonial wars who looked like a kindly grandfather. Short, portly, with a magnificent white walrus mustache, Plumer was known to his troops as Old Plum or Daddy Plumer. He was meticulous where Gough was bold, cautious where Gough was aggressive. Plumer believed in limited objectives, overwhelming firepower, and exhaustive preparation. His men trusted him because he spent their lives carefully. The contrast between the two commanders would prove fateful in the months ahead. Opposing them was Crown Prince Ruprecht of Bavaria, commanding the German forces in Flanders. Despite his royal title, Ruprecht was a professional soldier of considerable ability. He understood that his forces could not match British numbers or firepower in a sustained battle, but they did not need to. German defensive doctrine had evolved dramatically since the Somme. The old practice of packing the front trenches with men had given way to something far more sophisticated. The new system was called elastic defense. Instead of a single fortified line, German engineers had constructed a web of mutually supporting strongpoints, extending miles behind the front. The forward positions were thinly held, designed to absorb an attack rather than stop it. Behind them lay networks of concrete pillboxes, machine gun nests with interlocking fields of fire, and specially trained counterattack divisions held in reserve. When the British attacked, they would push through the outpost zone only to find themselves exhausted and disorganized, facing fresh German troops emerging from deep bunkers to drive them back. The pillboxes were the backbone of this defense. Known to the Germans as Mebu, these reinforced concrete bunkers had walls 3 to 4 feet thick, impervious to all but the heaviest shells. Machine gun crews sheltered inside during bombardments, emerging when the shelling lifted to scythe down the advancing infantry. Hundreds of these fortifications studded the ridges around Ypres. Many would still be standing a century later. The Germans had also unveiled a new horror. On July 12th and 13th, just weeks before the main British offensive, German artillery fired shells containing a yellowish, oily liquid that clung to everything it touched. The substance burned exposed skin, blinded men who got it in their eyes, and caused agonizing blisters in the throat and lungs of anyone who breathed its fumes. It contaminated the ground for days, making positions uninhabitable. The British called it mustard gas. The Germans called it Yperite, after the place where it was first unleashed. Yet despite all this, there was reason for hope. On June 7th, General Plumer had demonstrated what was possible with careful preparation. For 2 years, British tunneling companies had been digging shafts beneath the German positions on Messines Ridge, south of Ypres. On that morning, they detonated 19 mines containing 937,000 pounds of explosives simultaneously. The blast was heard in London, 140 miles away. 10,000 German soldiers died in an instant, buried or incinerated by the largest man-made explosion in history to that date. British troops walked forward into the smoking craters and captured the ridge with relatively light casualties. Messines was a masterpiece. It proved that the German defenses could be broken with sufficient firepower and meticulous planning. It raised hopes that the main offensive, aimed at the ridges north and east of Ypres, might achieve similar success. But then Haig waited. 7 weeks passed between the triumph at Messines and the launch of the main assault. Haig needed time to reposition artillery, bring up supplies, and prepare his assault divisions. But those 7 weeks also gave the Germans time. Ruprecht reinforced his defenses, brought up fresh divisions, and thickened the belts of pillboxes and wire that guarded the ridges. The element of surprise that Messines had achieved bled away with each passing day, and the weather began to turn. On the morning of July 31st, 1917, British guns fell silent after a bombardment that had lasted 2 weeks, firing over 4 million shells into the German positions. In the pale light before dawn, 9 divisions of British infantry climbed from their trenches and began walking forward. Above them, heavy clouds gathered over Flanders. The first hours brought hope. At 3:50 in the morning, the assault waves surged forward behind a creeping barrage that walked across the German positions like a curtain of fire. On the left flank, troops pushed onto Pilkem Ridge and found the German forward trenches shattered and abandoned. Prisoners emerged from dugouts with their hands raised, dazed by the bombardment. By midday, some units had advanced nearly 2 miles. 6,100 Germans had been captured. Staff officers at headquarters marked their maps with satisfaction. The plan was working. Then the sky darkened. In the early afternoon, the clouds that had been gathering since dawn opened. Rain began to fall across the battlefield, not the light summer showers that soldiers might have welcomed, but a steady, drenching downpour that would continue for days. The shell-churned ground, already saturated from weeks of bombardment, could not absorb the water. Within hours, the craters began to fill. Trenches flooded. Communication wires, buried beneath the mud, shorted out and went dead. Artillery observers lost sight of their targets in the murk. The German counterattacks came that evening, materializing out of the rain and mist. Fresh divisions that had waited in reserve now struck the exhausted British troops clinging to their gains. In places, the line bent backward. Ground won in the morning was lost by nightfall. When darkness fell on July 31st, the British had suffered 27,000 casualties. The gains, though real, fell far short of Haig's ambitious objectives, and the rain continued to fall. August brought not victory, but a slow descent into nightmare. The rainfall that month would total 127 millimeters, more than double the seasonal average, and the heaviest August precipitation in 30 years. By the 4th of August, the battlefield had become impassable. The ground was no longer solid. It was something between liquid and earth, a gray-brown porridge that sucked at boots and swallowed the unwary whole. The mud of Passchendaele was unlike anything the soldiers had encountered before. It was not the thick clay of the Somme or the chalky slurry of Verdun. This was a viscous, clinging substance that seemed almost alive in its malevolence. Men described it as having the consistency of warm cheese or cold porridge. It did not simply impede movement. It trapped men like quicksand. A soldier who stepped off the duckboard tracks that snaked across the wasteland could sink to his waist in seconds. If he struggled, he sank faster. If his comrades tried to pull him free, they risked being dragged down themselves. The mud filled mouths and nostrils. It drowned men standing upright. The shell craters were the worst. The bombardment had created thousands of overlapping holes, each one a death trap. Filled with water discolored green and yellow by gas residue, these craters dotted the landscape as far as the eye could see. The wounded who fell into them simply disappeared. Stretcher bearers reported hearing cries for help from men trapped in the mire, voices that grew weaker and then stopped. There was nothing to be done. Reaching them meant joining them. The mud showed no mercy. The smell was something no survivor ever forgot. Decomposing bodies from previous years of fighting resurfaced as the ground churned and shifted. Corpses from 1915 and 1916 emerged from the earth, mingling with the freshly dead in a grotesque communion. The sweet, sickly stench of decay mixed with the sharp chemical bite of cordite and poison gas. Men vomited from the smell alone. It permeated uniforms, hair, and skin. Veterans would recall it decades later with perfect, horrible clarity. General Gough continued to attack, despite the conditions, despite the mounting casualties, despite the evident impossibility of meaningful advance. The orders came down to push forward. The Battle of Longmark opened on August 16th. British and French troops struggled through the swamp toward objectives they could barely see, much less capture. Some units became hopelessly lost in the featureless morass. Others reached their objectives only to find themselves isolated, cut off from support, and overwhelmed by German counterattacks. After 2 days of fighting, the gains were negligible. The losses were not. Gough's tactics compounded the misery. He favored broad fronts and ambitious objectives, the kind of sweeping advances that might have succeeded on dry ground with mobile reserves. In the swamp that Flanders had become, such ambitions were fantasy. Artillery could not be moved forward to support the infantry. Guns sank into the mud. Horses drowned in the mire, their carcasses adding to the obstacles. The tanks that had promised to revolutionize warfare sat immobilized, their treads churning uselessly in the bottomless slurry. 136 tanks had been deployed on the opening day. Most never reached the German lines. The great irony was inescapable. The bombardment that was supposed to destroy German defenses had created the very conditions that made advance impossible. 4 million shells had churned the drainage system into oblivion. Every crater was a potential grave. Every shell that fell added to the swamp. The weapon meant to enable victory had become the instrument of paralysis. Back at headquarters, Field Marshal Haig composed optimistic reports for the War Cabinet in London. The German army was weakening, he assured them. Enemy morale was cracking. One more push, properly supported, would achieve the breakthrough. Prime Minister Lloyd George read these dispatches with growing skepticism. He suspected that Haig was either deceiving himself or deceiving his political masters. But Lloyd George could not bring himself to overrule his commanders in the field. The offensive continued. The human cost defied comprehension. Captain Edwin Campion Vaughan led his company of the 8th Warwickshire Regiment in an attack on August 27th near the ruined village of St. Julien. 90 men followed him over the top that morning. They advanced through a landscape of flooded craters and tangled wire, under machine gun fire that seemed to come from every direction. German pillboxes that the artillery had failed to destroy spat death at point-blank range. Men fell and did not rise. Others stumbled into shell holes and vanished. By the time the remnants of the company reached their objective, only 15 were left unwounded. That night, Vaughan sat on the fire step of a captured trench and wept. His diary entry, written in a shaking hand, captured what official reports could not. He had led his men into a slaughter for a few hundred yards of mud. The German positions they had captured would likely be lost in the next counterattack. Nothing had been achieved that justified the price. He sat there in a stupor, he wrote, passing dozens of dead as he stumbled back through the darkness. Shell shock spread through the ranks like contagion. The constant bombardment, the unending horror, the impossibility of rest or safety broke minds that had survived years of war. Men stared blankly at nothing. They trembled uncontrollably. They screamed at sounds only they could hear. Medical officers struggled to distinguish between cowardice and collapse, between malingering and genuine psychological destruction. Many who might have been saved were shot for desertion. Others were sent back to the line again and again until the line finally killed them. Yet the front rotated as it always did. 4 days in the trenches, 4 days in reserve. But reaching the trenches had become a battle in itself. The approach routes were under constant shell fire. Duckboard tracks offered the only passage across the swamp, and men walked them single file in the darkness, knowing that a single misstep meant death. Journeys that should have taken 20 minutes stretched to 8 hours. Carrying parties collapsed from exhaustion before reaching the front. The wounded faced the same nightmare in reverse, borne on stretchers by teams of 16 men working in relays, slipping and staggering through the mire while shells burst around them. By late August, the truth was undeniable. Gough's offensive had failed. The gains were minimal, the casualties catastrophic, and the mud showed no sign of relenting. Something had to change. Haig finally accepted what his subordinates had been suggesting for weeks. The main effort would shift to General Plumer's Second Army. The methodical old general with the walrus mustache would be given his chance. Plumer demanded 3 weeks to prepare. He would not attack until his artillery was properly positioned, his troops specifically trained, and his objectives strictly limited. No more than 1,500 yards per assault. Overwhelming firepower concentrated on narrow fronts. Bite and hold, not breakthrough. Take what could be taken, consolidate it, and prepare for the next bound. It was not glamorous. It would not win the war in a single stroke, but it might, just might, make progress without annihilation. As September approached, the rain finally eased. The ground remained a wasteland, but it was no longer actively liquid. Plumer's guns moved into position. His assault divisions rehearsed their attacks on replica trenches behind the lines. For the first time since July, there was reason to believe that something other than slaughter might be possible. On September 20th, Plumer's methods were put to the test. The Battle of Menin Road began at 5:40 in the morning with a barrage of unprecedented intensity concentrated on a front of just 8 miles. Unlike Gough's ambitious sweeps, Plumer asked his men to advance no more than 1,500 yards. Every pillbox, every strong point, every belt of wire within that narrow strip had been plotted and targeted. The infantry moved forward behind a creeping barrage so dense that survivors described it as a moving wall of steel. The results were immediate and dramatic. Objectives fell within hours. German counterattack divisions, rushing forward according to their elastic defense doctrine, ran directly into the British artillery and were shattered. Machine gun nests that had survived the bombardment were methodically reduced by infantry teams armed with grenades and Lewis guns. By nightfall, the British held everything they had set out to take. 21,000 casualties was still a terrible price, but the Germans had lost 25,000, and for the first time in months, the exchange favored the attackers. 6 days later came the Battle of Polygon Wood. Again, Plumer attacked with limited objectives and overwhelming firepower. Again, the assault succeeded. Australian troops stormed the shattered woodland that gave the battle its name, fighting through a tangle of splintered stumps and flooded craters to secure the ridge beyond. German counterattacks broke against the wall of shell fire that Plumer's gunners laid down with clockwork precision. The pattern was holding. Bite and hold was working. Then came October 4th and the Battle of Broadsend. Australian and New Zealand divisions led the assault at 6 in the morning, advancing through a cold mist that clung to the shell holes. What they did not know was that German commanders had scheduled their own attack for that same morning. Counterattack divisions had moved forward during the night, massing in assembly areas just behind the front line. They were preparing to strike when Plumer's barrage fell directly on top of them. The slaughter was catastrophic. Thousands of German soldiers caught in the open were cut down before they could advance a single step. Those who survived the barrage stumbled forward in disarray, only to meet Australian and New Zealand infantry, already sweeping through their shattered positions. By mid-morning, the assault had succeeded beyond all expectation. Prisoners poured back in unprecedented numbers. Ground that had resisted capture for weeks fell in hours. Crown Prince Ruprecht of Bavaria, commanding the German forces in Flanders, recorded his assessment in his diary that evening. It was, he wrote, the black day of the German army in the Battle of Flanders. His defensive system had been broken. His counterattack divisions had been destroyed before they could counterattack. If the British continued with such methods, he confided, the position would become untenable. At British headquarters, Field Marshal Haig absorbed the reports with vindication. The enemy was tottering, he wrote. One more blow, delivered quickly before the Germans could recover, might achieve the breakthrough he had sought since July. The ridges beyond Brutsunde lay open. Passchendaele itself was within reach. Victory beckoned. This was the moment. Historians would debate for a century what should have happened next. The case for stopping was compelling. Plumer's objectives had been achieved. The dominant ground overlooking the salient was now in British hands. The troops were exhausted, the reserves depleted, and the campaigning season was ending. Every day brought the weather closer to the autumn rains that had drowned the offensive in August. To push further was to risk everything that had been gained. But Haig could not stop. He believed the German army was on the verge of collapse. Intelligence reports, filtered through layers of staff interpretation, suggested that enemy morale was cracking. Desertion rates were climbing. Prisoners spoke of exhaustion and despair in the German ranks. One more push, Haig convinced himself, and the edifice would crumble. He ordered the offensive to continue. On October 7th, the rains returned. They fell with a vengeance that seemed almost personal, as if the sky itself had determined to punish the hubris of generals. Within 48 hours, the ground that had partially dried during September transformed once again into liquid. Shell holes overflowed. Trenches filled with water to waist depth. The duckboard tracks that provided the only passage across the swamp began to sink and wash away. Artillery pieces that had been laboriously moved forward during the dry spell now sat marooned in seas of mud. Ammunition could not be brought up. The guns fell silent for want of shells. The attack scheduled for October 9th went forward regardless. The First Battle of Passchendaele, as it would be called, was a disaster from the first moment. Troops struggled to reach their start lines through mud that sucked at their legs with every step. Many arrived exhausted before the assault even began. The creeping barrage that had worked so brilliantly in September became a cruel joke. Artillery coordinates had been calculated for dry ground. The infantry, wading through knee-deep slurry, could not keep pace. The barrage walked away from them, leaving the German pillboxes intact and their machine guns ready. Australian and New Zealand troops advanced into a storm of fire. Entire battalions disappeared into the murk, their progress marked only by the stuttering of machine guns and the screams of the wounded. Units became separated, lost in a featureless expanse of craters and mud. Men who fell wounded drowned in shell holes before stretcher bearers could reach them. Objectives that staff maps showed as a few hundred yards distant might as well have been on the moon. By nightfall, the attack had failed completely. The gains were measured in yards. The losses were measured in thousands. 3 days later, the Second Battle of Passchendaele inflicted wounds that would never heal. On October 12th, the New Zealand division was ordered to attack toward the village of Passchendaele itself. The New Zealanders had fought with distinction throughout the war, earning a reputation as some of the finest assault troops in the British Empire. Now they were being sent against intact German defenses across ground that had become a swamp. The attack began at 5:25 in the morning. Within minutes, it had become a massacre. The artillery support was virtually non-existent. Guns could not be positioned properly in the mud, and those that fired did so blindly into the murk. German machine gunners in their concrete pillboxes had survived the desultory bombardment without a scratch. They opened fire as the New Zealanders emerged from their trenches and did not stop until there was nothing left to shoot. The New Zealanders could not advance and could not retreat, men sheltered in shell holes that filled with water as they crouched in them. The wounded who fell into the mire simply vanished. Sergeant Bert Stokes of the New Zealand Rifle Brigade survived to describe the horror. You could not help them, he recalled decades later. If you went in, you went down too. You could hear them calling, and there was nothing to be done. By mid-morning, it was over. 845 New Zealanders lay dead. Another 2,000 were wounded. The gains amounted to a few hundred yards of swamp. October 12, 1917, remains the blackest day in New Zealand's military history. It is commemorated annually as the single greatest loss the nation has ever suffered in a day of combat. Many of the fallen were never recovered. They remain beneath the mud, unmarked and unmourned except in memory. Haig finally acknowledged what his soldiers had known for weeks. The main assault force could not continue. The offensive would pause while fresh troops were brought up. The Canadian Corps, 4 divisions of veteran soldiers who had distinguished themselves at Vimy Ridge, would take over the final push. The Canadian commander was Lieutenant General Sir Arthur Currie, a 41-year-old former real estate agent from Victoria, British Columbia. Unlike the professional soldiers who dominated the British High Command, Currie had learned his trade in the militia and on the battlefields of France. He was methodical, careful with his men's lives, and utterly without illusions about what his corps was being asked to do. When Haig summoned him to explain the plan, Currie studied the ground and made his own calculations. Then he told his commander-in-chief what no subordinate was supposed to say. Taking the Passchendaele Ridge, Currie stated flatly, would cost 16,000 Canadian casualties. He questioned whether the objective was worth the price. The ground had no strategic value. The village was already rubble. The ridge commanded nothing that could not be observed from positions already held. Why, Currie asked, should his men die for a name on a map? Haig listened and then insisted. The attack would proceed. The ridge must be taken. Currie saluted and returned to his headquarters to prepare. If his men must die for Passchendaele, he would ensure they had every possible advantage. Canadian engineers began laying roads and tram lines across the swamp. Artillery was painstakingly positioned. Assault troops rehearsed their attacks on replica objectives. The Canadians would go forward, but they would go forward prepared. The cost would be exactly what Currie had predicted. The Canadian assault began on October 26th. The Third Battle of Passchendaele opened in darkness and driving rain, conditions so miserable that even veterans of the Somme and Vimy found themselves tested. But Currie had prepared his men as thoroughly as circumstances allowed. Engineers had constructed plank roads across the worst of the swamp. Artillery had been positioned with painstaking care, each gun emplacement reinforced against the sucking mud. The assault troops knew their objectives down to individual pillboxes, having rehearsed on replica positions behind the lines. The advance measured progress in hundreds of yards. Each German strongpoint had to be reduced individually. Infantry teams worked forward under covering fire, crawling through the muck to get close enough to hurl grenades through the firing slits of the concrete bunkers. When grenades failed, men rushed the pillboxes with bayonets, fighting hand-to-hand in the cramped interiors. The Germans did not surrender easily. They had held this ground for months and knew that every position lost brought the enemy closer to the crest. By nightfall on October 26, the Canadians had advanced 500 yards. It was not much on a map. It was an eternity in the mud. The cost was exactly as Currie had calculated, the casualties mounting with grim precision toward the 16,000 he had predicted. But unlike the disasters of earlier October, the gains held. German counterattacks broke against Canadian defenses that had been dug in immediately upon capture. The bite-and-hold doctrine that Plumer had pioneered continued to prove its worth. 4 days later, on October 30th, the Canadians attacked again. The objective was Crest Farm, a fortified position on the slopes below Passchendaele village. The fighting was as brutal as anything the war had produced. German machine gunners fought from their pillboxes until grenades silenced them. Canadian soldiers crawled through mud that reached their chests, rifles held above their heads, advancing yard by yard toward positions that spat fire at point-blank range. It was during this assault that Sergeant Major George Mullen of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry earned immortality. His company had been pinned down by a pillbox that commanded the approach to Crest Farm. Every attempt to advance had been met with a scythe of machine gun fire. Mullen studied the position, calculated his approach, and then did what no sane man would do. He charged the pillbox alone. Crawling through the mud, he reached the blind side of the concrete bunker without being seen. Then he climbed onto the roof, dropped down to the entrance and shot the German crew one by one as they emerged. Single-handed, he had silenced a position that had stopped an entire company. For this action, Mullen received the Victoria Cross. He was one of 7 Canadians to earn the Empire's highest honor in the final phase of the battle. Each decoration represented an act of courage that defied comprehension. Crest Farm fell. The Canadians consolidated their gains and prepared for the final push. Passchendaele village lay just ahead, a cluster of ruins on the highest point of the ridge. There was nothing left of the village itself. Months of shelling had reduced it to rubble, then reduced the rubble to dust, then churned the dust into the universal mud. What remained was a name, a map reference, a symbol of everything the offensive had sought to achieve. 16,000 Canadians would pay to plant a flag in its wreckage. November 6th dawned cold and gray. The 27th Battalion, known as the City of Winnipeg, led the final assault alongside the 2nd Canadian Mounted Rifles. They moved forward at 6 in the morning, advancing through a landscape that had passed beyond description. Shell holes filled with bodies, equipment abandoned in the mire, the debris of 4 months of battle scattered across a wasteland that resembled no place on Earth. The Germans fought for every foot of ground. Pillboxes that had survived the bombardment opened fire as the Canadians approached. But the attackers had learned their trade in the hardest school imaginable. Teams worked forward with grenades and Lewis guns, silencing each position in turn. By mid-morning, the 1st Canadian soldiers had reached the ruins of Passchendaele. By noon, the village was in their hands. The ridge was secure. Private James Peter Robertson of the 27th Battalion did not live to see the victory. During the assault, he had led his platoon in capturing a German machine gun nest, rushing the position and killing the crew with his bayonet. Later that morning, he spotted a wounded comrade lying in the open, exposed to German fire. Robertson ran into the storm of bullets, lifted the man onto his shoulders, and began carrying him back to safety. He had nearly reached the Canadian lines when a burst of machine gun fire struck him down. Robertson died with his burden still on his back. His Victoria Cross was awarded posthumously, one more decoration for one more act of courage in a battle that had demanded countless such acts. The battle officially ended on November 10, 1917. Small actions continued as the Canadians consolidated their hold on the ridge, but the offensive was over. 103 days had passed since the assault began on July 31st. In that time, British and Commonwealth forces had advanced approximately 5 miles. The cost was staggering. Canadian casualties totaled 15,654 within 350 of Currie's prediction. The man who had questioned whether the ridge was worth the price had been proven exactly right about what the price would be. Total British and Commonwealth losses for the entire campaign ranged from 244,000 to 275,000, depending on how casualties were counted. German losses were comparable. Perhaps 220,000 men fed into the same grinding machine. Combined, nearly 500,000 soldiers had been killed, wounded, or listed as missing. The daily average across both sides exceeded 4,500 casualties every day for more than 3 months. Many of the dead were never found. The mud had swallowed them, and the mud kept them. Identification was often impossible even when bodies were recovered. The cemeteries that dot the Ypres contain thousands of graves, marked only with the inscription known unto God. Thousands more names are carved on the memorials to the missing, men whose bodies simply vanished into the churned earth and were never seen again. Field Marshal Haig declared victory. The ridge was in British hands. The German defensive system had been cracked. The U-boat bases on the Belgian coast remained distant objectives, never seriously threatened. But the official reports emphasized the ground gained and the casualties inflicted on the enemy. Whether the exchange was worthwhile remained a question that Haig's defenders and critics would debate for generations. 5 months later, the debate became moot. On March 21, 1918, the German army launched Operation Michael, the great spring offensive that would bring them closer to victory than at any point since 1914. Reinforced by divisions transferred from the collapsed Eastern Front, The Germans struck the weakened British lines with overwhelming force. Within days, the front that had held for years began to crumble. The Passchendaele Ridge fell in less than a week. Ground that had cost nearly 300,000 casualties to capture was abandoned in a matter of days. The village that had claimed 16,000 Canadians was back in German hands before April. 5 months of agony, 500,000 men killed and wounded, and every yard of it lost in the time it takes to read this account. The mud received new victims. The war ground on. The ridge would be retaken in September 1918 during the 100 Days Offensive that finally ended the war. It fell in a matter of days, with a fraction of the casualties. The German army, exhausted by its own spring offensive, could no longer hold what it had seized. But by then, the name Passchendaele had already become a synonym for futility, for slaughter without purpose, for the terrible gap between the plans of generals and the reality of war. Lieutenant General Kigel, Haig's chief of staff, allegedly visited the battlefield for the first time as the campaign ended. The story may be apocryphal, but it captured a truth that transcended mere fact. According to the account, Kigel's staff car struggled forward through the mud until the ground became impassable. The general stepped out and surveyed the wasteland stretching before him, the craters and the corpses, and the endless brown sea of churned earth. Tears streamed down his face. "Good God," he whispered, "did we really send men to fight in that?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Passchendaele. The name itself seems to catch in the throat, as if the mud that claims so many still clings to the syllables. Nearly 500,000 men fell in those 103 days. 5 miles gained, 5 months held, then lost in less than a week. Today, the village of Passchendaele stands quiet and rebuilt, but the fields around it hold the dead. Tyne-Cot Cemetery, the largest Commonwealth war grave in the world, contains nearly 12,000 burials. Most are unidentified. The Messines Gate in Ypres bears 54,000 names of men whose bodies were never found. Every evening at 8, traffic stops beneath its arch. The last post sounds as it has since 1928. For them, for all of them. The mud has given up some of its secrets over the years. Farmers still uncover bones and shells each spring. The iron harvest of a war that never quite ends. Somewhere beneath those fields, thousands remain. The earth that drowned them keeps them still.